It's a great honor to be able to introduce such a celebrity. And when I first saw you on TV, when you were in Russia, I think it was your first visit, and it was really, really nice. And now we can see you here. And Abhigya Anand is an internationally renowned Vedic astrology researcher. And can you imagine that he founded an astrological research institute at an early age, actually at the age of 13? And now he has a track record of successfully predicting major events, and among them, the Russia-Ukraine war and also the COVID-19 in, I think, 2020 or something, yeah, including the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. And with over 1 million regular followers, Abhigya's YouTube channel is one of the most influential in the field of astrology worldwide, providing regular updates on the future of the world, including predictions made days, weeks, or months before major events occur. For example, the prediction of the attack in one of the places in the world was made 3 days prior to the attack itself on the 4th of October 2023. And also, Abhigya Anand nowadays consults major asset management and law firms around the world. And probably he comes to Russia from time to time. Maybe next time we'll be able to see you in person in Moscow or
Definitely.
wherever you are. Yeah. And his
Okay.
predictions have been covered by leading newspapers and digital media outlets in Asia, Europe, and South America. And actually, his video made in 2019, which predicted the COVID-19 crisis well in advance, is currently the most viewed and discussed astrological predictions, one of the most discussed astrological predictions in decades, reaching out to over 100 million people and reigniting the debate on Vedic astrology. So please give a very warm welcome to Abhigya Anand.
So first of all, yes, everything is by Bhagwan's grace. Nothing is in my hands. I'm just an instrument, you could say, and everything that even going to present, that I'm even going to say present today is all by the grace of the Supreme Being. So today's subject is going to be about the cycles of global power and prosperity. We're going to analyze what is Lakshmi truly and what is Alakshmi and how Lakshmi and Alakshmi, that is prosperity and decline, translated loosely in English, prosperity and decline, move and flow from one continent to another, from one geography to another, from one civilization to another, and often how economic power moves with it, how policies move with it, how the whole world transforms, and how the astrological cycles are deeply interlinked with this. This research is in the nascent phase of its development, and hence, of course, a lot of people here are also very good at Jyotisha, and hence I believe that I think you can also bring a lot of insights into this, as and when you're listening to it, you might get a lot of ideas. So towards the end of the presentation, we'll also have a question and answer session where we can discuss these concepts in detail. So let's just begin. I'll be sharing some of the slides that I have on screen. Just a moment. Today's subject is going to be the prosperity and decline of nations, regions. I would put it as regions. In fact, I think there is a typo here. It's supposed to be regions because nations are very fluid. If you look at global history, they quickly change, borders change, nothing remains permanent. And that is one of the key important points of today's presentation. Nothing in this Maya, this material world, remains permanent, which is why our sages, especially, Sri Adi Shankaracharya, have clearly said that Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Govindam, Bhaja Mudhamate, Samprapte Sannihite Kale, Nahi Nahi Rakshati Dukrin Karane, which means that all of your sciences, arts, philosophies, and everything that is connected to the world, including wealth, youth, or all other material denominations, cease to exist at the time of death, at the time of dissolution. And we get to see this as Jyotishis. We are lucky and we are blessed to be able to look into such larger cycles and see as prosperity and decline unfold right in front of our eyes. And this helps us understand and appreciate the creation of the Supreme in a more, beautiful manner. And that's one of the beauties of studying Jyotisha. So today is going to be the goals of today. First of all, would be to understand the flow of prosperity in and out of different geographies. So we're going to try and analyze how prosperity moves from one geography to another. I'm going to also demonstrate the importance of certain great conjunctions and other super cycles to understand this. Secondly, certain ideas, it's not yet completely developed, but certain ideas to expand research into the field of astrocartography, which helps us understand which sections of the world are impacted, which geographical sections of the world are impacted during certain planetary positions. If you were to assign astrological influence to a certain repository, the best repository for it is geography, a section of the world, a section of the global map. Rather than, say, assigning it to a particular race or a particular civilization or a particular language, the easiest way to assign astrological influence is to geography. The reason behind it is that at any given point of time, you can superimpose the zodiac or the ecliptic belt on to the globe and see where exactly a particular sign is rising. And at the same time, at the same universal time, simultaneously, you would have several signs rising in order around the globe. And that helps us analyze exactly where you're going to see specific influence. So today's presentation is going to be about understanding prosperity and decline, why we see prosperity and decline in certain regions, and exactly what the great conjunctions have an effect to, how there are affinities to certain elements with certain parts of the world. So this is going to be the subject matter for today. And also, we will touch upon human commerce and industry, since the theme of this particular conference is regarding wealth. So this is going to be a broad discussion on even wealth and how that transforms over a period of time. And wealth, of course, is value at the end of the day. How do we create value? Through industry. And how is that passed on to public? It's through commerce. So we're going to analyze how commerce develops through the course of these particular eras. So first of all, today's discussion is going to be regarding great conjunctions and great oppositions, two major super cycles that occur frequently. One is of 20 years. Both of them are approximately of 20 years. That's a synodic period, basically. And the sages have documented the great conjunctions as, with the verse Sammoha Koshau Bhayadau Prajanam in the Brihad Samhita. Garga Muni has written a lot about great conjunctions, which is basically the conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn. One has a 12-year period, the other one has a 30-year period. Based on the synodic principles, they come together about every 20 years, approximately 19.816. But every 20 years, Jupiter and Saturn come together. And every 20 years, approximately, they also move, they come in a significant opposition right in between the conjunctions. There might be opposition somewhere, 2 or 3 times in between, but at most, it is planted in between the conjunctions. And these two basically rule how the world is affected. We'll come to that very soon. And these cycles actually influence how the world changes over a period of time. So first of all, we're going to be looking through one important theory, that is, no single planetary event completely dictates the flow of the era. There are several different types of supercycles. In fact, even with the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, you have cycles related to the Ayanamshas themselves. You have cycles related to, say, larger Jovian and Saturnine cycles. Then you have the Yuga cycles in between. And then you have the Samvatsara cycles. You have the Barhaspatya Varsha cycles, which are also very interesting and detailed in the Brihad Samhita. And you have a combination of Jovian and Saturnine cycles, which is what we'll be discussing today. This cycle is generally overlooked because it is exceedingly complex. It even had me extremely perplexed at some point of time. Because of which I even stalled research into this field. But I feel today we are at a level at which we can discuss the cycles of Guru and Shani and understand its mysterious nature. So first of all, a few guidelines to understand the great conjunctions. So what is a great conjunction? We already understood that's the conjunction between Guru and Shani. It was described as a great conjunction for the first time by an ancient astronomer who was from the Parsi Jewish descent. His name was Mashallah. And it has nothing to do with the Arabian region. This person was a Parsi Jewish astrologer and astronomer who studied Vedic astronomy and astrology, as well as Hellenic astronomy and astrology. and brought together the traditions. He described these great conjunctions in detail. I'm sure this is present in the Garga Samhita as well, but we have lost large swathes of the Garga Samhita at the moment. But there is a chapter that specifically discusses the Samvatsara cycle as being based on the influence of Jupiter and Saturn. It's very beautiful, and I'll get to that very soon. First, a few guidelines to understand this very well. The type of conjunction is very important to understand first. So the Brihat Samhita, we have a very clear verse. Yuddham yatha yada va bhavishyamaadishyati trikalagnehi tad vijnanam karane maya kritam surya siddhantat. Then asanna krama yogad bhedol lekhamshu mardana savyaihi yuddham chatushprakaram parasharadyair munirbhir uktam. So this particular verse explains four different types of conjunctions between any graha. One being the Bheda conjunction, in which you have, the disk of one graha basically appearing to cross the disk of another graha, nearly like an occultation, but a partial occultation, which just the surrounding disk of the graha hits the other graha. It is already quite phenomenal to see that our sages had documented these combinations in such detail. And there's actually a lot more which we'll get to very soon. And then we have Ulekha, wherein it is just a borderline, borderline touch between the two grahas. This occurs a few times, and it has occurred in history a few times. The next one we will see is about 1,000 years down the line. So I hope you're all able to hear me clearly.
Yes,
sure.
Yes, we can.
So a couple of things. Then we have the Amshumardana conjunction, wherein the light of one graha kind of permeates with the light of another graha. We saw a mix of an Amshumardana and a Bheda conjunction not a Bheda one, the Amshumardana and the Ulekha conjunction in 2020, wherein the discs of the grahas were exceedingly close to each other. We're not looking at it from a telescopic standpoint, zooming in too deep, but a little bit far away when, you're able to see the discs of the two grahas clearly. And you're able to understand, how close they are. And 2020 was definitely one of those. So each of these conjunctions has distinct effects. And we'll get to that as well. The second theory is the reigning trigonal cycle. I will describe the trigonal cycle very soon. Some of you are acquainted with Medini Jyotisha deeply and who have studied the Hellenistic traditions as well will be able to easily identify what we mean by a trigonal cycle here. But still, for the benefit of all, I will be describing this in detail. Number 3 is a dominant graha in each conjunction. So the same astronomer which I was speaking about earlier, his name is Mashala, and he basically described this theory of the dominant graha in each conjunction, which is also mentioned in the Brihad Samhita. So if Guru is dominant, or if Jupiter is dominant in the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the effect is a little bit more positive than negative. This dominance is studied by two factors. One is which graha is north of the other graha. That graha that's north of the other graha in terms of celestial or ecliptic longitude would be termed as the stronger or the dominant graha. The graha that is in its auspicious placement, the graha that is placed in an auspicious nakshatra, and other similar factors. So the dominant graha often sets the tone for the next 20 years. Now coming to the next thing, which is the type of conjunction. The type of conjunction, as I mentioned earlier, there are 4 types. Bheda, Ulekha, Amshumardana, and Asavya. Asavya is the most common of all. It is when the two grahas are in the same ecliptic longitude, but they're not in the same latitude. They tend to be a little bit too far away from each other. But in terms of the ecliptic longitude, they're on the same longitude. But if you go out to the sky and look at it, and if you zoom in a little bit, you'll see that the two grahas are, quite far away in terms of the latitude, basically. There are completely different latitudes often. This is called the Asavya conjunction. And surprise, the Asavya conjunction tends to have a problematic effect compared to the previous conjunctions. Of course, all of them have a problematic effect, but the Ulekha conjunction is generally positive to an extent. It creates wars, but it also creates prosperity at the same time. The rest of them all have mixed effects. None of the great conjunctions are supposed to give entirely negative effects, except when it is exceedingly problematic. Not all of the great conjunctions are going to give you bad effects. This is one of the mistakes that was made by some of the medieval astronomers who started to spread fear amongst the people that every great conjunction has a disastrous effect on humanity. And eventually the study of this started to go away, started to fade, because Not every great conjunction has caused immense misery for an extended period of time. Of course, it has caused wars, strife, and it just accelerates the pace of the underlying geopolitical or economic tones at the point of time. It does not in any way, it is not negative by its, in its own strength, by the way. So, of course, it creates fear. And that we have seen time to time. Sammoha koshau bhayadau prajana, which means that the sammoha and the kosha conjunctions basically create fear amongst the people. It could be rational fear, it could be irrational fear, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of fear. And whether it is rational or not, is understood by studying these conjunctions in detail. So the type of conjunctions are very clear. The Bheda conjunction creates drought in land, and persons of great power are instantly affected by a Bheda conjunction. The Ulekha conjunctions create wars in the land, and the princes would, the kings and princes would quarrel with their enemies. That's what the shloka says. But in the modern day, we would say principalities, countries, and different parts of, society would begin to quarrel with each other. And the effect is to be studied by looking at the biggest powers at any point of time. The biggest powers would be affected the most. That's another theory in Jyotisha. The effect of these conjunctions is a little bit disproportionate, and it tends to affect the most powerful at any point of time, rather than the weakest parts of society. For example, it tends to affect the people who are ruling rather than the ruled. It tends to affect the countries at the dominant sides of the social order rather than the global order, rather than the countries that are at the bottom of the global order. So that's another point to keep in mind. And third, we have the Amshumardana conjunction, which is actually quite problematic when just the light of two grahas kind of mix with each other. So this causes hunger, disease, and advanced weaponry that is tested on humanity, and a lot of other situations do occur. If it's an Apasavya or Asavya conjunction, again, there would be war. A theme of these conjunctions is generally war and strife that is visible the moment they begin. Also, rapid economic progress, transformation in terms of science and technology, and a lot more which we discuss. The next thing is trigonal cycles. Now I'm going to describe what we understand today by trigonal cycles. It's still a mysterious thing because there are lots of things that don't fit in the original theory. But one thing that's clear is that there is something called a trigonal cycle. So when we see, Guru and Shani, as and when they basically conjoin with each other every 20 years, every third conjunction, they return to nearly the same sign. And every, ninth to 12th conjunction, they basically return to the same trigon, and they continue remaining in the same trigon. I will describe this by showing another file, which I think should be visible now on your screens. Here, please ignore the first, 5 entries. That's actually 14 AD, 34 AD, 54, 74, and 94 AD. I would like to first thank one of the senior researchers at the Pragan Jyotisha Institute, Dilip Bapadji, for compiling this data and sharing it. It was very helpful to conduct all of the research that you're seeing here today. And this is a list of 2,000 great conjunctions. 135 great conjunctions over a period of 2,000 years approximately. That's what you're seeing here now. So basically, the data here starts with 14 AD, although one of the most important conjunctions was in 7 BC or -6 years, basically. And what you're seeing here is that was a very important conjunction, and a very powerful conjunction. It resulted in the rise of Christianity, and some of the most important events related to the great Jesus Christ also occurred in this time frame. Basically, a lot of very powerful events were happening in this time frame. We can, of course, go thousands and thousands of years back into history and look at more cycles, but in the interest of time, I'll be focusing on just a few of them today and describing these cycles. So this Excel sheet starts with 14 AD. And it basically ends at 2020. And each of these great conjunctions have been carefully vetted, although not all of them have been analyzed in detail. And I would welcome any researchers here who are interested in this great project to join us and look deeply into each conjunction, understand what kind of effect it has. But that's towards the end. And now coming to this particular sheet, a few other things to keep in mind is that I have basically hidden conjunctions that are triple conjunctions. They're also very important, but I've hidden them for the time being. For example, as you can see here, conjunctions that occur, in between in quick succession instead of following the regular 20-year rule. Of course, this is because of the synodic, situation. They tend to create triple conjunctions over a period of time in between. And so I have just hidden them to have consistency in data, basically. So if you look at this, every couple of great conjunctions occur in a single element, which we call the trigonal elements. Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius fall under the Agni Tattva, which is fire, the fire element. Fire does not just mean the fire which you see physically. Fire in this case means energy, transformation, and spiritual upliftment, and changes in terms of moral values, societal values, and everything changes. And that's basically fire. It also, on the more mundane side, explosions, changes in terms of, say, you would see new inventions that would come about, rapid new inventions related to mostly the fiery element. It could be firepower, or it could be sudden changes in the global order. All of these things happen in the fire trigon, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. And then we have the Earth trigon, which follows, which is Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, which is Vrishabha, Kanya, and Makara. So within these three signs are known as the earthy signs. Almost everyone who knows astrology knows this classification, but I'm just repeating it just in case. And then we have the airy trigon, which starts with Mithuna. Then we have Tula, then we have Kumbha, basically. And then finally, we have the water trigon, which is the last of the trigons, which starts with, of course, Kataka, that is Cancer, Vrishchika, which is Scorpio, and Meena, which is Pisces. So this is basically the trigonal sequence. And the interesting thing is that because of let me just also share the diagram which I was talking about here. Yeah, because of a peculiar motion of Jupiter and Saturn, they tend to come together in these trigons. And Kepler was one of the first people to put this on paper and show exactly how it works, though I'm sure there was a remnant of this in some of the ancient Hellenic texts as well, upon which he later built it, built his theory out of. So basically, if you look at these trigons, and all of this is based on the tropical system. And just before we continue, I would like to explain why I'm using the tropical system here. Most Vedic astrologers tend to use the sidereal system, including me. I use the sidereal system for everything, including predictions. Does this look like an apparent contradiction? It seems to be, but actually it is not. Let me explain why. The Sayana chart, or the tropical zodiac, is the natural zodiac of the sidereal zodiac. This is because, as all of you know, the sidereal zodiac would basically be same as the tropical zodiac, would come together, in a precession cycle of about 25,772 years overall. So what we get from this is that the tropical zodiac is the natural zodiac of the sidereal zodiac, because it's a sidereal zodiac that keeps, moving over a period of time to ultimately come and sink back in with the tropical zodiac in a continuous cycle. So the sidereal zodiac is, of course, the most important thing to use for current affairs, to understand the current pulse of events. You cannot take nakshatras and fix them onto the Sayana zodiac because they are essentially sidereal. You cannot combine that and just use the Sayana zodiac. It's possible to just use the Nirayana zodiac, but it is not logical and it's not ideal to be using just the Sayana zodiac. However, when you're looking at super cycles, larger cycles of time, it is helpful to look at the natural zodiac of the sidereal zodiac, which in this case is the tropical zodiac. And also these patterns are only observable properly when you look at the, at the tropical zodiac. Now, for example, if I switch to sidereal position, which are also provided here, you would see that you would not see a very similar, cycle. Basically, there are lots of mixtures in between, and it has its own unique cycle with a list of, conjunctions just in fire, followed by 2 in earth, followed by 2 in fire again, and 1 in earth, 1 in fire, earth again, and then air in between. It has its own unique cycle. We are trying to study exactly what is going on here as well. There seems to be an oscillatory pattern, moving back and forth between elements. There is a pattern here, but the most distinct and clear pattern is with reference to the tropical positions. And that is visible here. So you start with 1480 and up to 213 AD approximately, you have the fire trigon. And then later the subsequent cycles continue, and then you have the Earth trigon that starts 392. Then from 392 AD approximately, it's all approximate figures, you have 590, where you see the start of the next cycle, which is the water cycle, approximately 590. And after 590, you have the start of the water cycle, which ends at around 809 when you have the fire cycle that begins. And then the fire cycle continues with, all of the conjunctions occurring in fire. You're seeing, I'm sure some of you might have questions about these these intermittent water, or say, the opposing element or the other element comes in between somewhere. But if you notice, I've also marked that these are actually edge conjunctions. So 28 degrees Pisces is just 2 degrees away from Aries, which is a fire sign anyways. So you'll see similar things here. Aquarius 29 degrees is technically just 20 minutes in this case away from a water trigon. So I just, colored it in a different color to show that it is still part of the water trigon. And hence you basically continue and you see 809 to 1007. And about 1007, you have a new trigonal cycle that ends 1226, which is another very important great conjunction. Jupiter and Saturn are literally so close to each other. And guess what happened in this time frame? We had Genghis Khan, who was elected by his people together by his tribes, and completely dominated the world, wiped out nearly 20% of the global population at the time, and completely transformed geopolitics around the globe, even altering climate change. That was the scale of the impact that he had. He completely changed the world in 1226. And that is, again, no one man can create this much of a change in the world unless aided by a greater cycle, which in this case was the magnificent conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn around the time. It's very unfortunate, the series of events that took place after that. But what we must just observe here is the sheer scale and the size of the effect that is observed when a great conjunction occurs. So this, my dear friends, is one of the starts of another trigonal cycle. And then it continues till 1425, where we have the next water cycle that begins, which ends 1603. And some of you might ask the proof for these cyclical things, considering the minor inconsistencies in between. The proof for this is that I studied some of the old Hellenic texts as well, and it seems to be that they considered 1603 to be start of a new cycle, and they expected an Armageddon to occur around that time frame. Of course, wrongly. As I mentioned earlier, not every great conjunction is negative in its own sense. Some of them are also exceedingly positive. So basically, 1603 was another transformative great conjunction. And this is what we are anchoring it upon. And the other subsequent and precedent periods are based on 1623. So 1603. 1623 was another extremely close conjunction in several hundred years. And next, it progresses for another 220 years. What I forgot to mention is that each cycle is approximately 200 to 240 years long at most, and 200 years, or at the least, it's about 183, 185 years in length, which I'll also show you as a comprehensive table very soon. So there's a cycle that starts 1603, and it ends 1802 approximately, when a new cycle begins. As you can see here, there is an edge cycle again that's interluding in between here. It's about 24 degrees Aries, and we have the earthen cycle that begins around 1802 or 1821. This is disputed. There's still some research going here whether it should start at 1802 or 1821, and suggestions are welcome, of course. So now we start at 1802, and we end basically in the year 2020, wherein we see a proper airy start. The reason why I haven't taken 1981 as the start is because, one, it is too short of a period, and it would hardly give us 180 years at the most. And number two, because 1981 was not that close a conjunction. It was a triple conjunction, but not that close a conjunction. And number three, because it makes perfect sense to start at 2020, which also had a very powerful great conjunction, exceedingly close to each other. And it's the start of a new trigonal cycle. And this is the main reason behind why we consider 2020 to be so monumental. One, it is so extremely close. The last time we had such a close conjunction was around 1226, if I'm right. Latitudinally as well as longitudinally, this is impressive in terms of the closeness of the conjunction. And that's how we had the whole world change in 2020. I will also describe the previous changes very soon, but that's how we had the whole world change in 2020. This might even turn into a whole 3 hour seminar or even more than that. But in the interest of time, I'll quickly run you through some of these important trigonal periods that have been observed. In 2019, when I was studying global patterns, I came across this specific great conjunction, and somehow it was so special that I felt the world is going to change in this period. In fact, even I was confused. I thought probably we're going to see a world war. So in my video, I mentioned that there could be a world war, and I also thought there could be a pandemic. So I mentioned there could be a pandemic since I studied the great conjunctions of 1345, 1346. And ultimately, when I made the video, I put them together and said there's going to be a recession, there's going to be a transformation of the global order, there's going to be a pandemic and a major war. Out of this, we had probably 3/4 of the things that happened ultimately. But one thing is for sure, the years after 2020 will be known as a completely different era. Nothing similar to it has been seen in the last 1 or 2 centuries easily. And this is a completely transformative time frame. And what will happen in this period? That is one of the subjects of today's discussion. And I'm really sorry that this is going to be a long historical discussion as well. We'll be going into history, and a lot of people here, I'm sure, would love an analysis of history. But for those of you to whom this might be slightly boring, you can open Jagannatha Hora or other software on your PCs and check each one of these great conjunctions and try to figure out why one specific event occurred during these great conjunctions, and you yourself will start to love the reciprocity of logic here. And now I would like to continue with basically showing you all the list of great conjunctions, the list of trigonal periods as I believe they are supposed to be. So as you can see here, this is a summarized list, and the ones marked in bold are starts of new mega cycles, or I would call them super cycles. These are generally 794 years long. Is this a sidereal zodiac? This is basically the tropical zodiac. The sidereal zodiac figures are here, as you can see.
Sorry, Abhigya ji, are you using for these the trigonal patterns, right?
Yes.
You're using
Sidereal, tropical. For the trigonal patterns, we use tropical ones because, as I mentioned earlier, the sidereal ones have their own distinct pattern, which is not linking in with the longitudes of Jupiter and Saturn. I'll explain why.
Okay.
So when we see the 794-year super cycles, basically, every 794 years or so, Guru and Shani come back to nearly the same, approximately 2 or 3 degrees away from where they were initially. And this only occurs when you look at the tropical, cycles, basically. And as I mentioned earlier, this is for good reason. This is because the tropical zodiac is a natural zodiac of the sidereal zodiac. So now, as you can see here, of course, you can, superimpose this. And for understanding the effects, you have to combine tropical and sidereal zodiacs. For the effects will be a combination of the two. For example, say within this fire element, if the tropical and sidereal zodiacs are coinciding, you would have a very probably a stronger effect. And if you see them as being two different ones, you would see a receding and a proceeding effect. For example, you would see the effect of both, water and fire towards this particular trigonal cycle, 1603, the spread of colonialism. In the sidereal zodiac, for example, you would see that, just a moment. Yeah, so in the sidereal zodiac, for example, you would see that the same period, 1603, occurs in a water trigon. In the tropical zodiac, it occurs in a fire trigon. Now, this entire period, you would see the effect of the sidereal zodiac trouncing the effect of the tropical zodiac, but the tropical one leading it into the next, overall 800-year cycle. So if you want to understand the effect of 800 years or the vast 250-year cycle, 240-year cycle, you look at the tropical zodiac. If you want to understand the immediate effects, the shorter term effects, you look at the sidereal zodiac. For example, colonialism was mostly spread through ships, and there was a lot of voyages throughout this time frame. But very quickly, you started to see the fire effect step in, and you saw a lot of inventions, a lot of scientific transformation, and we also saw a lot of wars. And very quickly, the voyages kind of reduced to an extent, and it quickly shifted to land once again. So the sidereal zodiac had a more temporary effect than the tropical one. Is my point here? Of course, it's debatable, and we can discuss on that as well. So these are the starts of the trigonal cycles, as you can see here: fire, earth, air, water, and then there's a huge reset between water and fire. And why is there a huge reset between water and fire? And what's the theory behind this? It's basically, if you look at our ancient texts, we've always talked about Gandantas, and most of the people who are very familiar with Jyotisha would know where exactly the Gandantas are. They are between the water and the fire trigons, generally. And so the primary Gandantas, they are Nakshatra and Lagna Gandantas as well, but talking about the Kala Chakra Gandantas. So the most significant of these Kala Chakra Gandantas occurs between Vrishchika and Dhanur Rashi. Now, Vrishchika and Dhanur Rashi has been given the title of the most powerful intersection, the most powerful Gandanta. The second most powerful one is the one between Kataka and Simha, that is Cancer and Leo, and the least powerful of these all in terms of negative effects. But one of the most significant in terms of positive effects is the intersection between the Meena and Mesha Rashis. Why so? Because the ones between Vrishchika and Dhanus. Why is this section so important? Even I was, very interested in this for a very long period of time. I wanted to know why exactly the Jyeshtha Pada 4 and Mula Pada 1, the exact point between Scorpio and Sagittarius, is so important. So when I went, into Stellarium and tried to analyze this and, went through a lot of different sources, I realized that was a big revelation that this is the center of the galaxy. And you have the largest supermassive black hole located right there, and that's why it's such an important time frame. So our sages, despite having probably, as people say today, no access to telescopes and other sorts of technologies, they were able to identify that there was something very powerful and fundamentally extremely strong right in between Scorpio and Sagittarius. And that was only realized by scientists as recently as about 150 years back, that we have such a big black hole.
So they knew about the galactic.
They knew it, of course. Exactly. How else would you pick Scorpio and Sagittarius, right? So that's what's fascinating. Just imagine, sages have talked about Abhukta Mula Sandhi in the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra as being one of the most important sandhis. A good point to note is that the description of the Abhukta Mula Sandhi is not so detailed in Hellenistic texts. It's only detailed in the Parashari texts. It's not even mentioned in the texts that are aligned with the Hellenistic system. For example, Brihat Samhita, etc., or Satyacharya's manuscripts. It's primarily described in Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, and people often cast doubt on the authenticity of the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. Even that should be laid to rest here, because some of the concepts there mentioned are extremely complex for someone to just bring out of thin air. And the dashas, the complex systems, and especially this one, the Abhukta Mula Sandhi. So that's another point. Of course, we digressed a little bit, but this is another point why the Abhukta Mula Sandhi is so important, and why the intersection between the water and the fire trigons are important. And may I point out exactly what we are seeing here? For example, the intersection between the water and fire trigon occurred 7 BC to 14 AD, 7 BC to 14 AD, basically. And that was when the start of Christianity occurred, and some amazing events happened in this period. The whole world changed drastically, dramatically. That was pure, true Christianity that started in that time frame. It was very much aligned with Vedantic philosophy. Of course, debatable, but I would even say there was a strong connection between these two. There was a strong connection between Bharata and the Jesus of Nazareth. So this occurred exactly between a water and a fire trigon. And now you come and gradually, of course, everything gets corrupted, started to become political over a period of time, with different people coming in and going. It started to get attached with politics. When spirituality is linked with politics, what comes is religion. And religion tends to quickly, initial parts of religion are fine, but then it quickly tends to corrupt humanity to a large extent. And similarly, we had another super cycle here, water and fire. And I think some history buffs would be able to tell us what happened in this period. And of course, this is not as similar to the one earlier. The reason why I would say 7 BC to 14 AD is more powerful and more influensive than the one around 590 to 809, around 809, is because that cycle had one of the most important great conjunctions, which is also called in some of the ancient Hebrew texts as the Star of Bethlehem, which was observed in the sky around the same time. So that's why I consider this trigon as one of the most important trigons. Possibly it is the start of a bigger super cycle that we have not yet explored. But keeping this to rest, let's look at this time frame. This was the period when Islam spread around the world rapidly and transforming landscapes, changing the world completely, and causing numerous genocides. And there were a lot of violence, something that hasn't been observed even in the early periods of the Roman Empire. Even the Roman Empire probably did not cause that much of damage as this one time frame did. It also resulted in an Islamic golden age wherein a lot of arts and economic progress was made near Baghdad, which was also quickly put to an end. I'll come to that as well in each of these trigons. Each of these trigons is significant, but the trigonal start and end cycles signal a shift. Nothing more than that. They just signal a shift in the global order. And it's an 800-year cycle that creates the actual shift in a global order. Now, the most recent start of a big trigonal super cycle of 794 to 960 years was in 1603 AD, which has been widely documented. If someone has questions about why exactly I picked 1603 AD, I have not brought this out of my own calculations, but it was being discussed a lot in the Roman Empire, as well as in ancient India and elsewhere, as being a harbinger of a very new development across the world. So that's why I picked 1603 AD. And this was the new start. And what did we see after 1603 AD? If I'll allow you all to guess a little bit for a while, but 1603 AD started institutionalization of slave trade, the invention of the stock market for the first time ever. Amsterdam, we had the first stock market that came up. I think it was exactly in 1603 AD, and that's what makes it crazier. You saw, in Amsterdam, the first joint stock, capitalist company that evolved, and colonialism, of course, began at around the same time. Let's view this from a very neutral lens. Of course, slave trade is the worst thing that happened around the time frame, but there were other things that were also good and bad combined. The stock market, for example, the widespread, use of capital has spurred innovation in several ways. It has also created vast amounts of inequality. It's debatable as to whether that inequality was present in the previous trigonal cycles as well. But I would say, of course, it has created a gulf of differences between third world and first world countries. There was not so much of a difference in any of the previous trigonal cycles, except around probably around the Roman Empire, wherein there was a similar era of inequality. So 1603 to 1802 AD, anyone can know that this was one of the most significant periods that mankind has ever seen. And the British Empire spread around the world. There was another bout of extreme violence. And if you see, actually, most of the voyages occurred in the water trigon, exploration of the world, when some of these European powers came to India. In fact, they were actually trying to search for India, and they ended up in what is today called the United States, North America, and they ended up colonizing the entire section as well. All of that happened under these two trigons, which I will describe in detail why and how. But most of you who have studied this already would have an idea of why, and now we just need to explain in detail, one by one, how you would see such an impact. So at the moment, one important thing that people are a little bit confused about is 2020 is not the start of a new super cycle. It is the third in the list of a trigonal super cycle, but it is a trigonal cycle of its own. So each of these periods, as you can see, are approximately close to 200 years. This one is debatable. 213 to 392 is debatable. I'm working on this to see, exactly what's supposed to be different here. And even 590 is debatable. Some say it should be 610. Again, that is also something that is currently being worked on.
Abhigya ji, 1 minute. Can I just, sorry to interrupt, but didn't the Islamic rulers come to the Indian subcontinent around
712.
600?
712 AD. 600,
Yeah.
we had friendly exchanges during, friendly in the sense, of course, very neutral exchanges between, civilizations. The Indians at that time did not have an idea of what was to come about. They thought, it's just another, empire and it's not going to affect them much. But then if you look at the Sunnah and Thavban, one of the slaves of of the Islamic people at that time, he has narrated clearly that the Prophet himself ordered an invasion of India, and the Indians were unaware of this at that time. And suddenly, out of a sudden, we felt betrayed because in 712, the first invaders came in. They invaded Sindh. And just reading that part of history brought tears to my eyes to see what kind of genocides occurred in the aftermath of that time frame. Something that would put the present genocides that people talk about at, totally at the bottom of the list in terms of the casualties around that time for no reason. Like none of the Indian emperors ever laid claim to the Middle East. None of them ever tried to attack any place, beyond in the Indian subcontinent or take over anything. They always remained bound to this space. And I hope and I believe we always will remain a peaceful and amazing civilization for the world. But this was a shock to India, and that exactly occurred during the last phase of the water cycle. Does this ring bells? Of course it should, because 1425 to 1603, we had another water cycle wherein the European colonialists did the same thing that the Islamic ones did in their water trigonal cycle. And that's what makes this special. Does that answer your question, Ji?
Yes, indeed.
Yes. So then there was another round of invasions in this cycle, of course, towards the northern part of India. We had several invasions. But what's most important to note is this 1226 AD. This is a very important trigonal cycle. This is when the Islamic Golden Age ended abruptly between 1007 and 1226. It's important to note that the actual, the invaders from Arabia themselves did not cause damage to India during this time frame. Rather, it was a radical Turkish, invaders that used those sermons, or rather misused. It's debatable whether it was used or misused, but to invade India. And the actual Islamic Golden Age, which was flourishing very well in Baghdad, where a lot of innocent people and very friendly and nice people used to live, a lot of cultural innovations took place. That unfortunately came to an abrupt end in this time frame, and exactly 1226 AD, when Genghis Khan was elected as the leader of his people, and he stormed through the steppes and invaded several civilizations, brought several kings down to their knees, and destroyed the Islamic Golden Age. This is the end of the Islamic Golden Age, although it continued as the Ottoman Empire, and in a very unequal way. When I say Islamic Golden Age, the historians mean that this period was a period of equality, of prosperity, wherein several sections of society were blooming. There was poetry, there was art, architecture, and peace instead of frolicking adventures around the globe. So yes, that ended, and unfortunately, a more unequal, barbaric Islamic, non-civilization exploded throughout the surface of the globe. So another theory is that religions rise and decline during, approximately synced with the trigonal cycles. This is another thing I observed. For example, if Christianity started here, it began to decline around 809 AD. Around 809 AD, we saw a rapid proliferation of Islam throughout Europe. In fact, at one point of time, even Spain was converted to Islam, and it was called Al-Andalus. And then it was reclaimed in the Reconquista. But what we can see is that during this time frame, we had a tremendous rise in Christianity, then a fall in Christianity between 809 and 1603 AD, wherein there were a lot of crusades. And of course, Christianity remained in pockets, but Christians had to undergo extreme violence. And in fact, they themselves created a lot of violence too. Of course, that's how politics works. But then this was the period of decline of Christianity. Then comes another period of ascension, but this time not of Christianity, but of countries that have Christian power, but the power of the church had already fallen and has never come back to the same position as it was around 392 to, around the first few trigons of Christianity. So we can call these the trigons of Christianity, these the trigons of Islam, and these the trigons of, I would call it Sanatana Dharma, which is one of the things that we will discuss again today. But yeah, this is what we're going to see. In the next trigon, we will see a rapid resurgence in Dharma, but this was one of them. And if you go even beyond, if you go before 1480, I'm sorry, it's a bit, the sequence is a bit up and down. But if you go before 1480, you'd see Buddhism and Jainism, one of the biggest transformations that was ever seen in the world, one of the most influential transformations. From India, one great and amazing saint, the great Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, completely transformed the religious landscape of the time. And again, that coincided with the Great Conjunction. I have not put that on paper, but it is so. In the next trigonal cycle, we'll see a resurgence of another major feature of Dharma, which will be more peaceful and more calm. I'll explain my reasons behind this. It'll be very similar to the Buddhist trigon, basically, or somewhat partially a mix of the Buddhist and the Christian trigons, so to an extent. Whereas this trigon was unbelievably violent. Any historian would agree with it. Even the ones who align with the Islamic ideology would agree that this trigon was one of the most devastating ones for the world. So 1425 to 1603, I think we already explored this. If you look at it, this is how the world has been continuously transforming. Another important thing to keep in mind is that India saw its golden age in this period, as you can see here. This is the air trigon of the previous to previous cycle. And this was a very auspicious period for India. Of course, it ended towards the end, it started to become really bad. But between 392 and 590 approximately, we saw the Gupta golden age, in which we had brilliant astronomers, mathematicians that we know today, Aryabhatta and everyone else. Let me open another file to explain this clearly. Can you see my screen, the new one that I've shared here?
Yes, we can.
Sure. So this is a very long document that I prepared, thankfully, with the help of Dilip Babaji's data, as well as some help from ChatGPT to put through all the information. And I will share this with you all, so you all can go through the exact events that occurred during each time frame and exactly. And even this document also contains the tropical and the sidereal longitudes of Jupiter and Saturn when each great conjunction occurred, the major battles that occurred, and so on and so forth. So I prepared a list of waxing and waning powers and dominant powers. I hope we're not running out of time. May I know when this session, when
No,
we
don't
have the
worry,
next?
we have plenty of time.
Okay, great. Sure. So, for example, this is table one, in which we had, India, the largest leading economy. This is based on Angus Madison's estimates of the economy of each era. And in the second super cycle, China was the leading economy for a short period of time because of the Han invasions in India. Then we had India again reclaiming the largest economy. And when I say largest economy, it's about 28 to 33% of the global GDP at the time, something that is even higher than what the US represents today. I think it's about 16 to 18%. So then we had again India as a rising economy. But if you look at it, the dominant power is often not India in any of these cases. And that's because India never asserted its power over other countries, and hence it wasn't what you would call dominant. Whereas the other empires that you see here were basically the actual dominant empires of each time frame in each period. And now we go to the next major trigonal cycle. And in this cycle, we had, again, India and China continued to be leading economies of the world. China once again. But in between, the dominant powers on the other hand side, power tends to flow with wealth, but at times it depends on the decisions taken on the basis of wealth as well. And that, ultimately shows the power of a particular empire. So when you see here, Eastern Roman Empire was the most dominant one, but India and China continued to be the most wealthy and prosperous ones. China again, but between the 7th and 8th, we had a new power that came up, which would shape the whole, global influence. And as I explained earlier, this is in line with the trigonal cycles. As you see here, it's the Umayyad Caliphate. this was the peak of Islamic civilization, but not the peak of radical Islamic power. And now we go down to the Abbasid Caliphate, which was again the dominant power, even superseding any Western powers in that time frame. And India quickly started to, go to the second or third in terms of the leading economy, but still it was really, really good. In India, we had the Chola Empire, that was a rising empire, an excellent maritime power that nearly conquered the whole of Southeast Asia in a rather peaceful manner, and also established arts. And some of the most beautiful temples you see today are a product of the Chola Empire in Tamil Nadu. So all of this happened in this period. And I'll very soon come to the conclusions that I have, not conclusions, but the analysis that I have for 2020 onwards. But this will help prime it up for now. So now we see the high medieval period. This is when we had more transformation. A lot of important text here, but you can read this later. So the 9th century onwards, we had China as a leading economy again. India continued to be the second leading economy. The dominant powers again were both the French as well as the Abbasid Caliphate. And again, it continued that way. It continued that way for quite some time, in line again with the same cycle, just continued. So China continued to be a significant power throughout this period, and we had the Chola Empire reaching its peak somewhere around this time frame. But the Mongol Empire was the most dominant power in this period. And this very soon, you will see, paints a picture of the overall underlying cycle. So in the previous cycle, as you see, European powers were the most dominant. Suddenly, in the next trigonal major super cycle, we see Islamic powers or the Middle Eastern powers more dominant. Again, as I mentioned at the start of our discussion today, all of this has to do with geography and less to do with anything else, and also with religious ideology, which I will also describe in terms of another cycle very soon. But yeah, coming back to this, during the second super cycle, we had more Middle Eastern powers rising, but the economies still were leading in terms of, the Indian and the Chinese economies were leading throughout. Now coming to the late medieval to early modern time frame. This is another important transition phase. And as you can see, 1603 was a transition phase. And you will exactly, in this particular slide, you're going to see how the transformation actually took place and how the balance of power shifted from the Middle East back to Europe once more, and away from India and China as well. So the leading economies of these centuries also are China and secondly India. But in India, it was severe repression and inequality. So we were actually going through a partially bad time. We had some good empires as well, the Vijayanagara Empire, etc. On the other hand side, it was still quite average for so it was quite good for the radical Islamic powers. For example, the Ottoman Empire, which is today known to have caused the largest genocide that humanity has ever known. It's probably higher than what Adolf Hitler did in terms of the number of people who were killed. And it's probably even higher than several other empires have ever inflicted on humanity, but it's somehow covered up. But if you read Ottoman history, you'll be surprised by the level of harm that was done in this time frame. So radical Islam was very, prosperous in this time frame. And you would see the balance of power quickly going down. While they were very prosperous, they were not producing enough in terms of economic output. While they're very powerful, they were not producing enough in terms of economic output. Whereas on the other hand side, you could still see that based on Angus Madison's reports, India and China continued to produce the most economic output and brilliance throughout this time frame. And now you continue further and you come exactly here, you would see that Russia briefly becomes one of the dominant powers of the time, rising powers or the dominant powers of the time. And then gradually around the 16th century, India became the most powerful, empire, but it was under a complete genocide throughout this time frame. We started to see great decline. Now this ends one major trigon. Now we're going to enter another major trigon in this particular period. You would see the Dutch Republic, England, and King China rise, but King China would quickly fall after this, which is also documented very well in history. But the Dutch Republic and England, as well as France and the others, were quickly rising in this time frame of maritime powers. And this was the start of a new trigon. From this time onwards, everything changes, which is the exact point of this whole presentation. The trigonal periods completely changed geopolitics from top bottom. Now you see again that in the 18th century, India is now under the control of the UK overall. The British superpower, and and whatever you see in terms of the leading economy here belongs to Britain. It's being extracted by Britain throughout this time frame, and it continues further and further. And now the UK becomes the world's largest economy by 1870, and then USA becomes the world's largest economy. India and China have completely fallen out in this trigon, very similar to how the European powers fell off during the Islamic trigon, or what I call the Middle Eastern trigon. Here, the rest of the powers went straight off, and you just see, the USA. And in terms of the rising powers, in terms of the dominant powers, you see which ones are the most dominant ones: France and Great Britain, the British Empire, and again USA and USSR. USSR quickly fell off, so it's not considered a major power anymore. But it's mostly Western. You see that it slipped off from China and India. That's the whole idea here in terms of the movement of power. Since today's discussion is regarding wealth, I'm sticking to the topic of movement of power and wealth here. But there is something that's far deeper than this, including the major events and pandemics, etc., that occurred in each time frame. Basically, I haven't covered those here, but I'll just quickly make one point, after which we will move to the impact of great conjunctions, certain important great conjunctions, which will completely change your mind on how important this particular celestial event is. So based on what you have seen so far, if you look at the way power is moving exactly at the intersections of each trigonal supercycle of approximately 800 years, which is 794 years approximately, you see that the next, and within this, of course, the sub-periods are also very important. These are of 220 years each, and two of these sub-periods make a half cycle, which is 400 years of 20 great conjunctions. So now we're looking at three cycles. One is a 220-year cycle. The next one is a 400-year or 420-year cycle. And the third one is a 794-year cycle. And there's one disputed 960-year cycle. So in these 220-year cycles, a lot of transformation occurs. So my prediction and predictive analysis for the next 220 years is that we are going to see India as well as China already, but India as well, come back based on the previous trigonal analysis as one of the rising superpowers of the world, along with Southeast Asia and parts of Africa. Africa would again represent about 6 to 7% of the global economy. Currently, it represents, if I'm not wrong, about 3 or 4, which is very, very less for the population. And that's why they're suffering a lot. And very soon, there's going to be economic transformation completely. Power is moving from the West gradually, and it's moving away from the Western powers. And it's moving away from the Middle East as well. We're not going to see the Middle East resurging again because it's already seen its trigon, whereas India, China, and the other countries have long lost their trigons. If you see the horrors that the Chinese also faced under different sorts of occupation during their time frames, you would realize that the present rise that they're seeing is well in line with the astrological combinations that have been described so far. So you'd see both India and China rising above. You'd see Africa increase its representation in terms of geopolitical and socioeconomic power. And you'd see more economic output from India once again. It was completely stopped in the last trigon, in the last trigonal supercycle, but it will restart very soon. But for those of you who have questions about will India become what it was, say in prior to say the Gupta era, unfortunately, no. We probably might not reach a standpoint when we were representing about 30% of the global economy. That is going to happen after 2400 approximately, when this trigonal cycle completely ends. 1603 plus about 900 years, plus about 800 years, 794 years would take us exactly to about 2400 approximately. I have not yet checked the exact great conjunction there, but that's when in that time frame you'll see a resurgent eastern side of the world, and you'd see less poverty in India, less struggles here, and you'd see a more peaceful and more stable world to a large extent during this time frame. Of course, there are going to be invasions and stuff. Now, coming back to our trigonal, just a moment. What next is the biggest question at the moment, and we've gone through a lot of history and a lot of economic super cycles, but what next? So in 2020, we saw one of the closest great conjunctions. We saw a conjunction of outer planets. We saw squares between them right in the same time frame. We saw Mars also come into conjunction with Jupiter and Saturn. Actually, the effect of Jupiter and Saturn should have been closer to November or December in 2020. Why did the pandemic start earlier? And the reason why I predicted that in 2019, that a pandemic would happen somewhere around March to April of 2020, it would start around that time frame rapidly. The reason behind this was that Mars had already caught up with Jupiter and Saturn. So instead of in other conjunctions, you have to wait for Jupiter and Saturn to cast their impact on the world. The effect started earlier because of the influence of Mars. And that's another important thing to note. I will also get to that very soon. But in 2020, we saw one of the most important, significant great conjunctions in a new tropical trigon of the zodiac and in a new Earth, in a new tropical air trigon and in a new sidereal Earth trigon cycle. And this will result in tremendous transformation. India is going to rise back again. China is going to rise back again. Africa is going to increase its representation in the global economy. New scientific strides will be made, and humans will probably. I mentioned this 2.5 or 3 years back, but the dream of setting foot on Mars and the dreams of say space innovation and being able to make great progress in space technology will all happen right before us in the next 20 years. Artificial intelligence has boomed in such a way that we couldn't have even expected over the last 20 years. And everything has basically changed so rapidly. So I expect more of this to happen. The next, say, 15 years are going to be amazing in terms of the sheer historical events that will occur during this time frame. And we're also going to see quantum technology, the role of quantum physics and quantum computing completely transform the scientific landscape and the technological landscape. So there's lots that we're seeing throughout these periods, and that is the summary. 2020 to 2040, I have already, since 2019, I've been telling my clients and asset managers alike around the globe to invest in India and China mostly. China will see some political turmoil very soon, but invest in India and China mostly, because you'll see the best returns, since the basic rule of investing is that you buy low and sell high, to put it very, very simple. There are lots of other things, but to put it very simple. So this is
Abhigya, can I just sort of interject there just for a little bit of breathing room? So
Sure.
there are loads of concerns here in terms of the epicycle. You mentioned about the Islamic at some point, I forget which particular
Water
epicycle
trigon.
it was, that it
Yes.
would kind of stabilize and sort of decline. Is
Yes.
that right? So, but if you really look at the world statistics, right, India literally houses third largest
Islamic population.
yeah,
Right.
Islamic population, and Indonesia, and what all is happening, and what has happened recently,
Yes.
and what triggered we almost went to war. Well, we did go to war.
Yes.
So what I mean, that's one thing, because often it seems like it's not what it appears to be, right? So maybe this particular conflict has already played out for so long that it's almost irrelevant now. And but to have its head rear again makes me think that there is another underlying global intelligence at play here. As they call it, the globalists, or whatever name you can call it. Some call it, what do we call it? The
Mhm.
Israel, what are they called? The name for it? There's like a whole force of people who
New
are.
World Order.
New
Yes,
World
the
Order,
world
the
order.
elitist
Thank
team.
you. The world
Yeah.
order, or Zionist, or whatever. I don't know. Everybody has their own terms, to be
True.
honest. So, how powerful are they really? Because it appears that they have a very clear-cut agenda about depopulizing the whole planet.
Exactly. So I'll just give my thoughts here from an astrological standpoint first. First of all, every single cycle sees a particular world order. No world order is everlasting. No form of power is everlasting. There are conspiracy theories of, power structures coming for 2000 years or so, but I find them ridiculous for several reasons because I study global history and nowhere I see a continuous cycle of power. The human lifespan is 120 years at most. Our power cycles cannot last more than 4 generations of the human lifespan, which is 480 years. No power can last beyond this. And even if it does, religions, however, last for more. They last for 8 generations at least. They last for a complete trigonal cycle. Coming back to the trigonal cycles, a religion lasts for about 800 years in total powerful influence, after which it declines. Why so? Your race, your creed, your color, your civilization, your nation, all of these things come after religion in most people, and especially with Islam, because the very first thing that a person is taught, or rather indoctrinated at birth, is with these rigid rules of religion and hatred for others. And this is very common in several countries, and unfortunately, mostly in Islamic countries. So, this hatred that starts from a very young age can continue for generations onwards. Because imagine how many years the person has to spread that hate. Nation, a child only understands the concept of a nation by 10, 12, in some cases, maybe 5 or 6, but most children understand that a bit later. By that time, about 15 to 20% of their lifespan is already over, which is why I always, in terms of astrological cycles, I put religious influence at the top of the list in terms of power cycles. It's 800 years. And after these 800 years, religion becomes fragmented. People following that religion start to lose hope in it, and poverty starts to question their faith. And this is already happening with Islam. This happened with Christianity earlier because faith is something that's very deep, that's very spiritual. If you start linking it with prosperity, it doesn't work. For example, in Sanatana Dharma, we have a very clear thing. Just because you convert to a particular religion doesn't mean your fate is going to change. But unfortunately, in Islam, they have a theory that, no matter what, God will help them. That unfortunately has led to a lot of violence. In Sanatana Dharma, we believe that there are cycles of prosperity and decline, and you cannot keep winning just because you are basically following some sort of a holy sky book, right? So in our scriptures, we have something completely different. In our scriptures, it's basically that you go with the cycles of nature and you don't try to assert your dominance over others just because someone just told you to do so in a book long time ago. And you don't go around colonizing different civilizations and causing genocides around the globe. That's not what any of our scriptures have told us. So if you look at these trigonal cycles, they have an impact on religion. And each time, from a very neutral standpoint, without infusing any of my political opinions here, I'd like to say that each religion has a lifespan. Here, it's basically 800 years when Jupiter and Saturn return to the same position, because each great conjunction causes a little, or rather significant, change in human thinking. How many changes in human thinking can a religion survive? It starts to become outdated over a period of time. Any religion starts to become outdated. I'm not talking about spirituality, but religion. Say if you start believing in a particular concept of superiority over others. Okay, so that's going to end over a period of time because the great conjunctions are going to disprove you. The world is going to move forward, but your faith is going to, keep you pulled behind. And then at some point of time, you start questioning whether you should continue this or not, and whether you should change your worldview or not. And that happens with every single individual. Let me give examples. It happened with the Christians when the Islamic invasions began, and when they were helpless with the 3 Crusades. Unfortunately, they put up a great, there was a lot of bravery there, and they saved Europe as well to a large extent. But a lot of people converted. The weak-minded people converted to Islam because they thought, oh, well, after all, Jesus did not save us. And unfortunately, this has happened. Similarly, even a lot of weak-minded Hindus converted to Islam, answering one of your questions, during the Islamic rule. Why? Because when prosperity and power is extremely powerful, it overrides temporary concepts of religion. And at that time, the weak human mind tends to look for solace. And when it looks for solace, it searches for solace it ultimately, converts. The weak mind does so. The stronger ones remain, and that is our ancestors who did not convert. There's something very powerful about them which I admire even to date. Converting is a sign of a weak mind, weak mind and weak body, even in terms of evolution, basically. In most cases, in some cases, it was actually a philosophical disagreement with that version of Hinduism that resulted in conversion, but most of them were because of weakness. And unfortunately, trials and tribulations in some cases. And in some cases, it was just pure helplessness, lacking food, and the jizya that was imposed, and the death orders that were imposed. And some of them were basically, in our Sanatana Dharma, we do not say that God is going to protect you no matter what. We have a concept of karma. You get back what you basically do, what you deserve. And if you go back in history, even in ancient India, there was a lot of problematic karma that was committed, because of which we saw this cycle of destruction. And we already have a concept of destruction in Sanatana Dharma, unlike Islam and other religions. We have a concept of Nataraja, that if something is too prosperous for too long, you will see decline coming up very soon. Unfortunately,
Oh, yeah,
in other
absolutely. I totally
exactly.
agree. But you mentioned about the 800 cycle in terms of religion per
I'll
se.
answer that as well. Yes.
Yeah, but it has somehow I have this feeling, or maybe because being born a Hindu, it's sort of I find it an extreme honor and a privilege anyway. But that's a different story. I just feel that it has survived in
It
spite of
has.
all the beyond
Absolutely.
800, and
Absolutely.
I have no doubt, iota of doubt in my mind that it will continue to ad
It will.
infinitum.
Of
So, but
course.
that is more on a kind of like a feeling level. It's like a Jupiter in Cancer. It's like about feeling rather than looking at the scientific, the cycles. So,
Cycles.
if you can also kind of throw
Yes.
light on that aspect, that'll be great.
Definitely, definitely. So, answering the question exactly, I was, narrating this just to put into place exactly how, these conversions happen and how religion has an 800-year lifespan. And now coming to this, Islam today is not what it was in its golden age, nor is it what it was in its radical golden age, which I already described. The golden age was between 600 and about 900. Then the radical age was between 900 and about 1200. That was the peak of Islam. Imagine Baghdad was like today's New York. It was a center of global finance, center of global trade. Can you imagine? And today, Baghdad is completely broken. There is nothing there, and people are starving for food there. That is an example of how powerful these global cycles are. Now just look at Islam. Basically, is no more what it was earlier. Another important reason for this is that over 90% of adherents of Islam are in deep poverty, lack proper education, and 15% are radicalized as per a CIA report. And hence, they no longer are going to be capable of doing large scale invasions, but they will attempt. That's another important thing. During down cycles or during declining cycles, every global power attempts to assert its dominance over the other. And when it does so, it miserably fails. For example, Hitler tried during the down phase of. So we have a sub 400-year cycle, which I did not discuss here. 400-year cycle of geographical powers. So during the declining phase of Germany, Hitler tried to assert his dominance and tried to create a new empire of some sort. It miserably failed, and it caused tremendous harm to countless number of people. And he also did a couple of genocides. So it fails. And for the good, ultimately. Japan tried, for example, to create an Asian power of its own during an Asian decline. That failed. It was able to, just remain on its territory, but it was the only country to be nuked in history. It paid a price for all of that, going around the globe and invading different places. So any power or any religion or any political identity that attempts to assert its dominance over the rest of the world during a phase of decline will invariably face tremendous defeat. And to answer your question, Islam is currently in that position. It is currently in a phase of decline, and you are seeing it. And a lot of Muslims are also questioning it. I was also talking about collapsing from within. you cannot, a religion cannot be rooted out completely. It's not possible. And there are good factions of it as well. So a religion generally tends to collapse from within. And from outside. It has to be a dual pressure. The external pressure is falling and the internal pressure is also starting. A lot of Muslims are asking why God is not saving the children of Gaza. And even we have the same question, right? Over a period of time, like, why is this happening? But in our scriptures, we have at least some solace, because looking at all of this that is happening, we have at least some sort of a picture in mind that, okay, there is something called karma, geographical karma. Now coming to an important standpoint, important logic of geographical karma or civilizational karma. The concept in Jyotisha says that it's a very ancient concept. Your karma is not just bound to you as an individual, it also affects the country or the land that you live in. And this stems from the Vedic concept of a cursed land, as they say. They generally say that, wherever there is violence over a period of time, the land starts to accumulate negative karma as well, not just you. And there are inscriptions of this in the ancient scriptures. Next time I will probably share with you the verses too. It says that the land starts to become cursed. The land starts to become affected by papa. And even if the future generations are innocent people or whatever, even if there is a child born there or whatever it is, by direct effect of the land itself being cursed in a way, at the right time, there will be tremendous danger to that particular geographical space. And the time is decided by the cycles. And those cycles are currently affecting Islam and the Middle East as a whole, particularly the more impoverished areas of the Middle East. And some people look at the more prosperous parts of Islamic countries and say, no, Islam is not in decline. Well, I'd say, yes, it is for several reasons. One, these prosperous aspects of Islam are the ones we see. Why? Because, of course, wealth tends to stand out, but they're less than 1%. That's an important statistic. They're less than 5 or 6% of the overall Muslim population, and the rest of them are struggling around the world. There's a lot of, and it's mostly in decline. You might say that there are countries like Turkey which are not struggling as much as, say, poor people in India. That's a very good comparison. But on the other hand side, I say that those economies are currently falling. They're struggling to maintain stability. They're declining. Whereas in India, you're seeing millions of people come out of poverty every single month. You would say that every single month you're seeing people come out of poverty. You're seeing the purchasing power increase rapidly, and hunger is going off the list. Don't trust the Oxfam reports; they're a complete sham. Instead of that, ground reality of India. I've studied the history here. There are lots of historians have studied it. It's a lot better. We are seeing tremendous progress, and we'll see more very soon. And to answer your question, yes, Islam is in a phase of decline invariably. I'm not putting my personal opinions here, but just the astrological cycles. It's in the same phase that Christianity was. Again, even Christianity did not disappear from the face of the globe. It still exists in a very strong manner. But the power of the church is lacking. Today, if you go to, UK and hold up a mic and say, hello, people of the UK, I am launching a crusade and I want the support in the name of Christ. And I want all of you to come and invade this particular country. You'll be thrown off the podium in a couple of minutes because no one believes in that anymore. No one believes in committing atrocities in the name of God. Whereas if you did the same probably in Arabia in the 8th or 9th centuries with a loudspeaker and go and say that come on everyone, in the name of Allah, let's go march and destroy a couple of empires in India and let's bring them down to their knees. You'll have an uproar and everyone is going to come with you. That's no more the case. And it's no more possible as well. So and what happens when a civilization is declining or a religion is declining? They tend to get bright the most. Evil tends to shine brightest when it is about to decline. Anything, basically. And evil tends to act up the most. That's why you're seeing terrorist attacks, because that's frustration. It is not organized. It is frustration. They don't know what to do. They're seeing that their ideology of supremacy isn't working out. There are powers beyond their control. For example, in America is a superpower. They're unable to unseat that. They're feeling that Allah had given them, according to them, a feeling of superiority. But ground reality says different. So they go ahead and launch terrorist attacks, 9/11 and stuff like that. It's basically a period of frustration. We saw the same 26/11 in India and so long and so forth. So I hope and pray that these people realize as soon as possible that there is something called a period of decline. You must just sit down and accept it. and not try to assert dominance despite being at the weakest of your, powers. And for Hindus and for Christians and the rest of the world, I'd say that we must stay vigilant because evil tends to be the brightest at the time of decline. But at the same time, you don't need to be too worried about the extermination of your cultures. That's not going to happen. I keep telling people this. This is not going to happen. I've been saying this since a very long time whenever I started this research, and that gives me solace as well. But there will be invasions, there will be wars, borders will be redrawn, laws will change, constitutions will change on both sides. You'll see any country that aligns with radical Islam will start to decline, as opposing to the Islamic Golden Age, when any country aligning with radical Islam tends to rise. So at a time of decline, if you associate yourself with a declining ideology, you're going to fall invariably. And if the people of Turkey realize this soon, they can probably revert to a very, prosperous society. But unfortunately, I think it'll take them a few more lessons of nature for that to take place. And similarly for Pakistan. Pakistan was formerly part of a beautiful civilization of India a couple thousand years ago. They will need some time and a few whacks from nature to understand that the ideology they are aligning with is declining and is not helpful to them in the longer run. The idea of supremacy is not something that is in line with reality. No one can be supreme forever. I also would not claim the same. I cannot say that, Hinduism or India is going to be the supreme thing forever. No way. Everything rises, everything declines, and that is the sum total of what we're discussing today. It's just been told in a very long sequence of events, but the sum total is everything that rises has to decline, and vice versa as well in certain cases.
Fabulous, fabulous, fantastic. It's very comforting to hear that now.
Of course. But an important thing to note is that even during the previous trigonal cycles, there was violence in India. There was attacks from other powers. They were successfully repelled, but there was violence. There were attacks. There were problems. And similar things will happen. And as far as the future of Europe is concerned, I believe since they are not associated with a radical ideology at the moment, they will gradually, disintegrate in terms of their power. And if they're not very careful, then the parasitic. So what happens if you look back at history is that when a power is declining, it tends to start to become a parasite. What does a virus or a bacteria do when it realizes the body is fighting against it too much? It tries to search for the next host. So it starts to make you cough. And that's an evolutionary response. So cough, so it can spread to the next person and infect the next host. So what happens when a declining ideology is about to die or a declining empire is about to die? It starts to become a parasite. And this just happens. You can observe it. Humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We can, as you just mentioned, it's already happening. The whole of Europe is practically right now takeover and
gradually, yes.
Yeah.
Gradually.
And it's and it is on the total decline. Paul knows that, Paul, because he's residence here and he's the true blue English here. So Paul.
Yes, we will be.
But don't worry, it won't be an Islamic nation for sure, because as I mentioned, parasites do not get total control of the host. That's another theory I proposed. They tend to, collapse and.
But it is, people are predicting that, the English or the British will be a minority within about 30 years.
Because of the negative population growth. That is
negative population growth and the unlimited. We don't have any borders. We have unlimited immigration into the UK and into places like France as well. But if you get to France, they only come to England and then Ireland as well. The England that people know, the Ireland that people know is just about gone. And within the next 20 years, we'll be flushed completely down the toilet,
But
it's all gone.
Close your borders, but unfortunately, I believe that's going to be difficult. You need to probably close your borders from a
it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. There's talk about, certainly not under the present government or the Labour and the Conservative so-called right wing are both effectively Marxist. It's just how far communist are they? There is talk about the other party coming in, Reform, which some say is now the biggest political group, and there's some talk about them stopping it, but basically too late. No one's got the the intention, and they'll only be bought off by the globalists anyhow. The globalists control this country, and Islam's just the tool that they use to hit us with. What's really good, the really people who do this are the bankers, who knows who they are really, shadowy figures in this new world order, but they're using Islam to destroy the West. It's not that they're in favour of Islam. Ultimately, they'll eliminate them as well. But everything's. I just don't know what's going to happen, and there is talk of this country having civil war within 5 years, and that comes from Professor David Betts at King's College, London, who's a Department of War Studies. So they seem to be saying, whether you believe it or not, I'm not sure I do, that Britain will be in civil war within 5 years.
I see. Could be possible.
And he says it's inevitable, but that's what the professor says.
Yeah.
So any comments?
I definitely do tend to agree with that because unfortunately, Europe is also not in its heydays anymore. It's already seen its cycle of prosperity, so I don't expect that to return. And although you can probably stop it from declining further, from a very objective standpoint, I'd say that you're most likely going to see the civil war might really happen. Actually, I still need to analyze the prospects of that as well as when it could happen, but that's to be seen. And I think that's a very brilliant question.
Are we talking about United Kingdom?
Correct.
Yes, that's
between north and south. Would it be between north and south?
No,
I'd say it's mostly going to be between the right and the Islamists. The far right, the right, and the Islamists.
There is no far right. Can you please stop using? Can we stop using terms like far right? There is no far right in this country.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
It's just a complete lie.
True. That is very true. There is no far right. In fact, even
don't use it.
Some parts of our political spectrum are called far right, even though they aren't. But the thing is that when there is a civil war of some sort, what happens is that at the moment there might not be any far right. The justifications are completely right. I do believe Britain should close down, Islamists should be cracked down upon, and there should be a complete cleanse from the top to bottom.
It's already too late.
It's too late, of course. It's a late stage, as they say. It's a late stage of the infection. But what happens is that in case a civil war happens, you have extremely violent groups that rise and from both sides of the spectrum, and it ultimately creates a lot of violence. If at all something has to be done, it has to be done now, or else you're right, it's going to head towards complete chaos very soon.
But
I would also point out that we have a large Hindu population in this country, and there has been conflict between Islam and Hindus in this country.
There will be,
and
because
there's more Indians
coming
into this country, so it's only going to increase. The government will take the side of Islam because the globalists.
That's sad. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, anything that takes the side of a declining ideology tends to decline. So it just goes hand in hand.
It's not declining in this country. It's expanding and very fast. It's the fastest growing religion.
I would say
this is a microcosm,
but
parasitism. But not here.
That's a good point. So let me answer that. So is Islam declining or not? Number one, I would say if you just look at the parasitic populations within the UK, the percentage of the parasitic populations there are very less compared to the total percentage of Muslims that exist today. If you look at the total population of Islam across the world, they are living in abject poverty and violence. About 6 out of 10 Muslims face extreme violence in their lives directly from their own families or from their own state. And that's the horrible condition of Islam. It was not so, say, 1,000 years back. Today, everyone is in complete chaos. And anyone, if you look at the world instead of probably, of course, if you just look at the UK, they're probably living fine. That's because they're parasites. If you look at the rest of the world, Islamic populations are suffering incredibly. And they are no more at where they were. That is my whole point. For example, where they were in their golden ages, as I mentioned, they were the center of global finance. They were so powerful that European powers had to basically bow down before the Islamic caliphates at one point of time, right? And then all of that came down when the period of decline began. So how do I calculate a period of decline for religions? I use a 2,000-year cycle. Or more so 1600. So let's add 800 years to 610, which brings us to about 1410, exactly when the Ottoman Empire reached its peak. And exactly around 1450, you'd see the decline starting. By 1600, there was no Ottoman Empire anymore. Today, there is no Islamic empire in the world. You just have these little caliphates in different places. You have these little kingdoms that are so small, so tiny. The number of citizens of the UAE, which people generally show to say that Islam is growing, is 50 lakh. Less than, about 5 million people are citizens of the UAE. And 5 million is a very small number compared to 2 billion Muslims who are suffering. So Islam is clearly in decline if you just, look at the whole globe. And very soon it'll catch up in the UK as well. It's probably like, two clashing, and I do believe in the clash of civilizations. Historians tend to brush it off as a conspiracy theory because they believe it is against their ideology, or according to them, it damages social fabric. But and I don't really speak about it in public too much, but it is real. Clash of civilizations is real. And when two declining civilizations clash with each other, the one with limited power is crushed, and the one with more power tends to triumph. And Islam is going to be crushed in this. So I request, everyone not to be too paranoid about this. I'm very sure that your countries would stay. The only problem is that Europe, no, I don't expect Europe to do very well, but the US, on the other hand side, would do quite well for the next 200 or even say 250 years easily.
As much as we would love to continue with this, you are going to be speaking tomorrow. Perhaps we could carry on forward with similar discussion, and then we
Definitely.
get into the astrology behind the earthquakes and natural disasters.